A pale winter light hung over Vienna as security doors clicked shut one after another inside the International Atomic Energy Agency headquarters. In the corridors, the sound was fluorescent hum and hurried footsteps, punctuated by the metallic chirp of access badges. Outside, diplomatic cars idled in a slow line, exhaust drifting into the cold air. Inside, the world's most sensitive question, where Iran's most enriched uranium is and who gets to verify it, had narrowed to something brutally simple: access denied. According to Reuters, the IAEA has been unable to inspect Iran's 3 key-bombed nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan, since the U.S. and Israeli strikes last June, even as inspectors can still visit Iran's other declared facilities. Source: the agency's continuity of knowledge, its chain of verification, has been strained by months of missing data, missing cameras, and missing answers. Source: and now, Iran was tightening that denial into a condition, one that turns a technical dispute into a geopolitical ultimatum. This was not simply a standoff over inspections. It was a test of whether the global non-proliferation system still has enforcement power. According to Iranian state media cited by Reuters, Iran's atomic chief Mohammad Islami said the IAEA must clarify its position on the U.S. and Israeli attacks before inspectors are allowed into the facilities that were hit. Iranian officials said access requires a specific protocol, arguing that military strikes create environmental risks that demand guidelines before any verification can resume. Source: Iranian officials claimed the inspections so far have been limited to undamaged sites, and they criticized IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi for, in their words, allowing pressure from Israel and the United States to shape the agency's posture. Iranian officials framed this as a matter of fairness and mandate. The IAEA, they argued, recorded and supervised those facilities, so it must define its role when those sites are attacked. Source: at the United Nations, Iranian officials extended the same logic into the sanctions arena. According to Reuters, Iran's UN ambassador Amir Saeed Iravani told reporters Iran's nuclear program has always been exclusively peaceful, and Tehran would not recognize attempts to enforce sanctions against it. Source: Iranian officials cast the renewed sanctions push as political warfare disguised as legal procedure, insisting Iran is being asked to comply under conditions shaped by force. In Tehran's telling, the message is strategic as well as symbolic. Cooperation is available, but only on Iran's terms, and only after the IAEA addresses what Iranian officials call the precedent set by bombing-monitored sites. But the story quickly became far more complicated. Before we break down the snapback sanctions fight at the UN and what it means for IAEA access, hit like and subscribe so we never miss the latest dramatic developments shaping global geopolitics. What does the opposing camp say is really at stake? The answer is the integrity of verification itself. According to IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi, the standoff cannot continue indefinitely because the agency may reach a point where it cannot say it has any idea where the most sensitive nuclear material is. Reuters reported Grossi said Iran must submit a special report on what happened to the bombed sites and associated nuclear material, including an estimated 440.9 kilograms of uranium enriched up to 60% purity, close to weapons grade. Source: Grossi also warned that non-proliferation treaty safeguards are not a la carte, meaning states cannot selectively comply only when convenient. Source: the United States amplified that claim at the Security Council. In remarks released by the U.S. mission, Ambassador Mike Waltz said the IAEA reported Iran is the only state without nuclear weapons to have produced and accumulated uranium enriched up to 60%, and that for more than 8 months, Iran has refused to provide updated information on or access to those stocks at facilities affected by the June 2025 strikes. Source: in plain language, the U.S. position is that verification depends on inspectors seeing material, sealing it, sampling it, and tracking it over time. Without that chain, the world loses confidence not in claims, but in measurements. European governments echoed the same principle. In an official E3 statement to the IAEA Board of Governors, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom said cooperation with the IAEA cannot be made conditional on factors outside legal obligations, warning that conditional access undermines the safeguard system itself. The E3 also said the IAEA has been unable to account for Iran's uranium stockpile for more than 8 months and is forced to rely on commercially available satellite imagery to observe movement around Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. Source: between these narratives lies a complex reality that analysts are still working to understand. Why does this Iran-IAEA confrontation matter beyond Vienna briefing rooms and carefully drafted statements? The answer is that specific locations, Natanz, Fordow, and especially Isfahan, sit at the heart of both capability and credibility. Start with the target itself. The IAEA has focused heavily on Isfahan because, according to a confidential report seen by Reuters, Iran stored uranium enriched up to 20% and 60% at an underground tunnel complex there, and the agency observed regular vehicular activity around the entrance in satellite imagery. Source: Isfahan is not just a point on a map. It is a node where material can be protected, moved, and potentially processed undercover. That matters because enrichment is not a binary switch, it is a ladder. Material at 60% is not weapons grade, but it is far closer to the top of the ladder than civilian reactor fuel, and it compresses the time needed to reach higher purity if a decision is made. According to Reuters, the IAEA estimated Iran had 440.9 kilograms, enriched up to 60% before last year's Israeli-US attacks, and the agency and Western powers believe much of it is still intact. Source: the same Reuters report said Iran declared it was setting up a fourth enrichment plant in Isfahan, and the IAEA still does not know its precise location or whether it is operational. Source: that uncertainty is exactly what safeguards are designed to eliminate. Now connect that to sanctions. The snapback dispute is not paperwork, it is power. At the Security Council, the United States argued that reimposed measures require all UN member states to implement an arms embargo, restrict missile technology transfers, and freeze relevant financial assets, tools designed to constrict the pathways that turn industrial capacity into military capability. Source: Washington also accused Russia and China of blocking the work of the 1737 Committee, the body tied to those sanctions, because U.S. officials said Moscow and Beijing want to protect Iran and preserve defense cooperation now prohibited. Source: so Iran's condition on IAEA access and the U.S. push for sanctions enforcement are not separate stories. They are the same struggle, fought on two fronts, the front of measurement and the front of punishment. The message was clear. Iran was signaling that transparency would be treated as leverage, not as a baseline obligation. What happens next when verification stalls and sanctions harden? The answer is a chain reaction, moving from military posture to regional alignment to global economics, and finally into U.S. domestic pressure. First comes the immediate military layer. Reuters reported the conflict in the Gulf has widened, and the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical maritime choke points, has been paralyzed amid threats and attacks on shipping. Source: in response, Reuters reported the Trump administration has explored options, including U.S. Navy escorts for oil tankers through the strait and potential insurance support mechanisms to restore maritime trade flows. Source: when naval power enters the equation, the risk calculus changes. Miscalculation becomes faster. Signaling becomes sharper. Second comes the regional government response. At the United Nations, the Security Council report noted the Council adopted Resolution 2817, condemning Iran's strikes against Gulf Cooperation Council states, and Jordan with 13 votes in favor, and China and Russia abstaining. Source: that vote matters because it shows how quickly the dispute over Iran's nuclear program merges into the security concerns of Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Source: regional states are not debating enrichment percentages in isolation. They are responding to missiles, drones, and the vulnerability of ports, refineries, and airfields. Third comes the global market shock, and here the numbers are immediate. On March 12th, Reuters reported U.S. stocks fell sharply as crude surged, with the Dow down 1.56%, the S&P 500 down 1.52%, and the Nasdaq down 1.78%. Reuters also reported WTI crude settled up 9.7% and Brent settled up 9.2%, touching $100 per barrel. Source: the next day, Reuters reported Brent settled at $103.14 and WTI at $98.71, keeping inflation fears alive ahead of the Federal Reserve's March 17th meeting. Source: Brent prices rose, diesel costs climbed, shipping rates surged. That spike has consequences far beyond the Gulf because energy is embedded in food, transport, and manufacturing. Fourth comes the diplomatic pressure point, and it is visible in the procedural warfare at the United Nations. According to Reuters, Russia and China attempted to block a Security Council discussion tied to Iran sanctions oversight, but they were overruled in a vote of 11-2 with 2 abstentions. Source: according to the UN meeting record, the snapback mechanism, embedded in Resolution 2231, was triggered by France, Germany, and the United Kingdom in 2025, and UN sanctions were described as having been reimposed on 27 September 2025, a claim Russia and China dispute on legal grounds. Source: Meanwhile, Reuters reported IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi said the agency is trying to arrange a new nuclear deal between the United States and Iran, signaling that the watchdog is attempting to keep diplomacy alive even as enforcement arguments harden. Source. Fifth comes the domestic political reaction inside the United States, where sanctions and inflation become intertwined. The U.S. Treasury's own release said OFAC sanctioned over 30 individuals, entities, and vessels connected to illicit Iranian petroleum sales and procurement for ballistic missile and advanced conventional weapons programs, including 12 Shadow Fleet vessels. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Iran exploits financial systems to sell illicit oil and support proxies, and pledged continued maximum pressure. Source. And as Reuters reported, the administration was also preparing options to mitigate domestic fuel price pressure, including steps affecting shipping rules under the Jones Act. Source. When oil moves this fast, politics follows. Iran maintains that IAEA access must be conditioned on the agency clarifying its stance on the U.S. and Israeli attacks and establishing a defined inspection protocol for bombed sites. Source. The United States and its partners maintain that Iran is refusing legally required verification while stockpiles and facilities remain unaccounted for, and that sanctions enforcement must proceed. Source. The unresolved question is not simply whether Iran's nuclear program is peaceful or whether sanctions are legally activated. It is whether the world can still compel transparency when a state decides transparency is negotiable. The IAEA system was built on routine access, predictable measurements, and continuity over time. The Iran-IAEA standoff breaks that rhythm, replacing it with bargaining, delay, and competing legal narratives. And the sanctions clash at the UN Security Council shows how quickly nuclear verification becomes entangled with great power rivalry. Russia and China contest the snapback pathway. The United States and the E3 insist the sanctions are binding. Iran refuses recognition. Source. In that gap, uncertainty grows about material, about intent, and about the next step in a conflict already pressurizing the Strait of Hormuz and the global economy. Source. Will this Iran-IAEA ultimatum remain an isolated incident, or is it the beginning of something far larger? Stay tuned for further updates as this situation continues to develop. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss the latest dramatic geopolitical developments shaping the world.